The first time I saw the bulldozer parked on my pasture, I honestly thought the driver had gotten lost. The second time, I realized somebody was testing me. By the third Saturday, I was standing on my own front porch watching a woman in designer sunglasses tell a construction crew they could ignore the old farmer because he doesn't own anything that matters anyway. That's when I stopped trying to win an argument and started preparing for something much bigger. My name is Ethan Walker, and if you've never lived in a small American farming county, it's hard to explain how quiet a place can be. Quiet isn't just the absence of noise. It's routine. It's seeing the same pickup truck every Tuesday morning. It's waving to the mail carrier before they even reach your driveway. It's knowing exactly which field the geese will land in after the first cold rain in October. My grandfather used to say that land remembers everyone who walks across it. I laughed when I was younger because it sounded like something an old man would say after too much coffee. Now I think he was right. Every fence post, every worn path, every oak tree has watched generations come and go. My family had been on those 73 acres since 1958, long before luxury homes started creeping toward the edge of our valley. When my parents passed, the farm became mine. Not because I wanted to be rich. There wasn't much money in raising hay and a few cattle anymore. I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning everyone who came before me. The southern edge of my property bordered a narrow county road. Across that road sat an abandoned apple orchard that developers had recently purchased. Within a few months, survey flags appeared, then trucks, then engineers. Before long, rumors spread through town that the orchard would become an upscale neighborhood with homes selling for over $1 million. Most people welcomed the change. More business. More tax revenue. More restaurants. I didn't mind it either. Growth happens. Towns change. What mattered to me was one simple thing: respect the property lines. Apparently, that was asking too much. The first person I met from the development company wasn't an executive or an engineer. It was a woman named Vanessa Cole. She stepped out of a black luxury SUV wearing spotless white boots that had clearly never touched mud before. She smiled the kind of smile people practice in mirrors. "Good morning," she said. "You must be Ethan." "I am. I'm managing community relations for Silver Ridge Development." Community relations, funny title. She handed me a glossy brochure showing beautiful houses, walking trails, ponds, children flying kites under perfect blue skies. It looked less like real life and more like a movie set. "We're excited to become your neighbors. I hope it works out." "It will," she replied quickly. "Actually, there's one tiny thing." Of course there was. She pointed toward the southern pasture. "Our construction vehicles need temporary access while the main entrance is being finished." I looked where she was pointing. "My pasture, only for a few weeks." "No," she blinked. "I'm sorry, no." She laughed softly like I'd misunderstood. "It would really help everyone." "I'm sure it would. So, is that a yes?" "No." Her smile didn't disappear, but something behind her eyes changed. "I'm not asking you to sell anything." "I know. We're only requesting temporary access." "And I'm declining." She folded the brochure slowly. "May I ask why?" I looked across the pasture where 6 calves were grazing near the creek. "Because that's where my livestock lives. They can move. They already have a home." For the first time, her polished voice lost a little warmth. "Mr. Walker, sometimes communities have to make small sacrifices for progress." I nodded. "And sometimes progress has to learn where the fence is." She stared at me another second before climbing back into her SUV. As she drove away, I remember thinking the conversation had ended. It hadn't. 3 mornings later, I woke to the sound of diesel engines. 2 dump trucks were cutting across my pasture. Not the road. My pasture. Fresh tire tracks carved through wet grass that had taken months to recover after winter. I grabbed my boots before the coffee even finished brewing. The drivers looked confused when I flagged them down. We were told this was the access route. By who? The project manager. I don't care if the governor told you. One driver scratched his head. We've got maps. So do I pointed at the old cedar fence. County line's right there. The younger driver climbed down holding laminated construction plans. Sure enough, someone had highlighted a temporary access lane straight through my property. I took out my phone, photographed everything. The maps, the trucks, the license plates. The tire marks. One driver sighed. You look like the documenting type. My grandfather taught me something. What's that? The shortest pencil beats the longest memory. He actually smiled. Fair enough. The trucks backed out without an argument. I figured the mistake would be corrected. Instead, it became the beginning of something I never saw coming. Because later that afternoon, while I was repairing the damaged fence, I noticed Vanessa standing across the road talking to several contractors. She looked directly at me, smiled, then pointed at my posture again, not angrily, not dramatically, just confidently, like someone absolutely certain that eventually I'd stop saying no. And standing there with a post-hole digger in one hand, I realized something that made the back of my neck tighten. She wasn't trying to convince me anymore. She was waiting for me to get tired. Unfortunately for her, nobody had explained how stubborn 3 generations of farmers could be. The funny thing about people who are used to getting their way is they almost never start with force. They start with confidence. They assume you'll eventually realize they're right. Then, when that doesn't work, confidence slowly turns into entitlement. And entitlement has a way of becoming something much uglier. Monday morning, I drove into town and stopped by the county recorder's office. I wasn't expecting surprises. I simply wanted fresh certified copies of my property survey and deed. The clerk behind the counter, Mrs. Langley, had known my parents for years. "Ethan," she said while printing the documents, "you having trouble already?" "You heard," she smiled. "This town hears everything." I carried the papers straight to a local attorney named David Brooks. He wasn't flashy. His office still had wood paneling from the 70s, and every file cabinet looked older than I was. He studied the survey for several minutes before leaning back in his chair. "They don't have an easement." "I didn't think so." "They don't have temporary access rights." "I know. They haven't even applied for one." I raised an eyebrow. "So what exactly are they doing?" He looked over his glasses. "They're hoping you don't know the difference." That sentence stayed with me all week. Because it explained Vanessa perfectly. She wasn't trying to steal my land. She was trying to borrow it without asking twice. By Wednesday afternoon, another convoy showed up. This time there were 4 trucks, not 2. I drove my pickup straight across the pasture and parked sideways in front of them. The lead driver rolled down his window. "We've got authorization." "From who?" "Project management." "You don't." He handed me another packet. The highlighted access lane was still there. Only now someone had handwritten "approved by owner." I looked at him. "I've never signed anything," he frowned. "Seriously?" I nodded. The poor guy looked embarrassed. He wasn't trying to cause problems. He was following paperwork someone else had created. I snapped photos again. Every page, every truck, every license plate. Then I politely asked them to leave. They did. About 30 minutes later, Vanessa's SUV came flying down the county road. She stepped out before the vehicle had completely stopped. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I almost laughed. "My question exactly. You turned away our contractors. They were trespassing. They had approval. They had fake approval." She folded her arms. "You're making this project very expensive. And you're making my posture very muddy." Her expression hardened. "You know, most people around here are excited. I'm happy for them. They understand the bigger picture. I understand fences." She took one slow step closer. "You really want to be the man who delays an entire neighborhood over a few tire tracks?" I looked toward the pasture. The calves had wandered closer to the creek again. They're not tire tracks. What are they? They're the beginning, she frowned. The beginning of what? A very expensive paper trail. For just a second she looked uncertain, only a second. Then the practiced smile came back. We'll figure something out. I already have. She drove away throwing gravel behind her tires. That evening I installed 4 trail cameras along the southern fence. Not because I expected drama, because I expected routine. And routine is easier to prove than arguments. The first alert came at 5:42 the next morning. A survey crew had entered through the unlocked construction gate across the road and walked nearly 60 yards onto my property carrying orange flags. I drove over before they'd finished their measurements. The youngest surveyor looked barely 22. He held up both hands immediately. "Sir, we're just following GPS." I pointed toward my fence. "GPS doesn't overrule deeds." An older surveyor checked his tablet. His face slowly changed. "Oh, what? I think our base map is wrong." "You think?" He sighed heavily. "No, I know." They packed up without arguing. As they left, the older man quietly said something I'll never forget. "You might want to keep every picture you've been taking." Yes. I planned on it. I don't think this is a mapping mistake anymore. Neither did I. Friday afternoon, the county inspector showed up at my farm. Noise complaint, dust complaint, livestock runoff complaint. According to the paperwork, several anonymous neighbors had accused me of violating environmental regulations. The inspector spent almost 2 hours walking the property. He tested drainage, measured storage tanks, checked equipment. When he finished, he smiled. "You've got one of the cleanest operations I've inspected this year." "So who filed?" He couldn't tell me, but he didn't need to. I already knew. The following Saturday, I walked into Miller's Diner before sunrise. Every farming town has one. Coffee that's stronger than necessary. Waitresses who know everyone's order. Retired men solving the world's problems before 7 in the morning. I slid into a booth beside my neighbor, Frank Dawson. Frank had farmed the land west of mine for almost 40 years. Without looking up from his coffee, he asked, "Construction folks bothering you?" I blinked. "How'd you know?" He chuckled. "They stopped by my place first." "They did, wanted to lease part of my field." "What you tell them?" I said no. "What happened?" They asked again. And I said it louder. We both laughed. Then his smile disappeared. "They'll keep pushing." I figured. "They aren't building houses." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're building schedules." That landed harder than I expected. Schedules cost money. Every day delayed meant contractors sitting idle, equipment rentals continuing, investors getting nervous. Pressure wasn't an accident. Pressure was part of the business model. That afternoon I received a certified envelope, Silver Ridge Development. Inside was a formal offer, $20,000, temporary access agreement, 6 months, legal release. I read every page twice, then folded it neatly. Monday morning I mailed it back, unsigned. Attached was a single sentence. "My answer remains no." 3 days later, someone cut the lock off my south gate. Nothing was stolen, nothing damaged, just the lock. The message couldn't have been clearer. Someone wanted me to know they could come and go whenever they pleased. Instead of replacing it immediately, I called Deputy Lisa Grant from the county sheriff's office. She arrived within 15 minutes. Unlike some deputies I'd met over the years, she didn't rush anything. She photographed everything herself, measured the cut chain, collected the broken lock. "You have any suspects?" "I have theories." "Theories don't help me." "I know." She looked across the road toward the construction site. "They giving you trouble, they're giving me opportunities." She looked at me for a moment. "Most people would have said headaches. I prefer opportunities." "For what?" I smiled. "Documentation." She laughed quietly. "I've met your kind before." "My kind?" "People who never yell." "Is that bad?" "No." She closed her notebook. "They're usually the dangerous ones." Before leaving, she handed me her card. "If anything else happens, I'll write it down." "I figured you would." That night, I sat alone on the porch watching the lights from the construction site flicker across the valley. Bulldozers still moved after dark. Generators hummed in the distance. For the first time since this whole thing started, I wasn't angry. I was curious, because none of this made sense anymore. A company worth hundreds of millions of dollars wasn't risking lawsuits over a simple access road. There had to be another reason, another deadline, another secret buried somewhere beneath all those glossy brochures and polished smiles. I just hadn't found it yet. But the next morning, thanks to an unexpected conversation with someone who worked inside the project, I finally would. The next morning started with a phone call I almost ignored. The number wasn't saved, and around here unknown numbers usually mean telemarketers or someone trying to sell extended warranties on trucks that died 10 years ago. I answered anyway. "Mr. Walker, speaking. My name is Michael. I work for Silver Ridge." There was a long pause before he continued. "I can't say much over the phone, but you need to look at the county planning agenda for next Tuesday." What am I looking for? They're asking for final infrastructure approval. I know that. No, you don't. The line went quiet again. They're presenting revised site maps. So, they aren't the same maps we've been working from. Before I could ask another question, he hung up. I sat there holding the phone for another minute. Then I drove straight to Attorney Brooks. He didn't waste time. Within an hour, we had requested copies of every filing submitted to the county over the previous 3 months. When the clerk handed us the documents, David spread them across the conference table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he pointed at one page. There. I leaned closer. The southern access lane, the one crossing my pasture, had disappeared. So they fixed it. He slowly shook his head. No. He slid another document beside it. This survey was filed 4 months earlier. The property lines were different, not slightly, completely. One version showed my fence exactly where it had stood for decades. The newer version quietly shifted the boundary several feet without explanation. No new survey, no easement, no recorded agreement, just a different drawing. David leaned back. They're asking the county to approve construction based on documents that don't match their own engineering records. Is that illegal? If it's intentional, he smiled for the first time in weeks, it's much worse than trespassing. The county board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening. By 6 o'clock, every seat inside the old courthouse was full. Developers, contractors, neighbors, local reporters. Most people expected another routine approval meeting. Vanessa certainly did. She walked into the room carrying the same polished confidence she'd worn since the day we met. When she noticed me sitting quietly beside David Brooks, she gave me a polite smile. The kind that said, "You're still here," I smiled back. The chairman opened the meeting, project summaries, budget updates, road maintenance. Everything moved exactly on schedule until Silver Ridge reached the agenda. Vanessa stood and began her presentation. She spoke smoothly, confidently. New jobs, economic growth, safe neighborhoods, improved infrastructure. Every slide looked beautiful. Children playing. Walking trails, happy families. Then she reached the final page. "We respectfully request approval to proceed with Phase 2 construction." The chairman nodded. "Any questions from the board?" David stood. "Yes, sir." Every head in the room turned. He carried a thin binder to the podium, not thick, not dramatic, just organized. "Mr. Chairman, before any vote is taken, I'd like to submit several certified public records into today's proceedings." Vanessa looked confused. David handed copies to each board member. "Page 3, he said calmly. Pages turned. Silence settled over the room. "The applicant's engineering survey filed in March." More pages. "Now page 7, another survey, filed in June." The chairman frowned. "These boundary lines don't match." "They do not." Vanessa stepped toward the microphone. "There must be some misunderstanding." David never even looked at her. "Page 11. Another document, county tax parcel records. Original subdivision maps. Historical aerial photography, one after another. Every document told the same story. The property line had never moved, not once. Only Silver Ridge's submission had changed. A board member adjusted his glasses. When was this revision authorized? No answer. Another board member asked quietly, was the adjoining landowner notified? Still no answer. The county engineer, who had been sitting silently near the back wall, slowly raised his hand. I'd like to review those documents. He walked forward, spent nearly 5 minutes comparing maps. The room was so quiet you could hear paper sliding across the table. Finally, he looked toward the chairman. I cannot explain this discrepancy. Vanessa stepped forward again. I'm sure this is simply an administrative error. David finally turned toward her. Then perhaps you can explain why your contractors were carrying field maps showing an access road that does not exist. He placed photographs on the projector. Truck tracks, survey stakes, date stamps, license plates, then security camera footage, clear enough that nobody needed narration. The chairman watched the video all the way through. When it ended, he folded his hands together. Ms. Cole, she swallowed, yes. Did your company authorize construction activities beyond the recorded project boundary? She hesitated. The silence answered before she did. One board member closed his folder. Another removed his reading glasses. The county attorney leaned toward his microphone. Mr. Chairman, I recommend all votes regarding Phase 2 be suspended pending a complete review of submitted engineering documents. I agree. So do I, one by one. Every board member nodded. The chairman lifted the small wooden gavel. Approval is hereby postponed until all property records, surveys, and construction plans are independently verified. The sound of that gavel echoed through the courtroom. It wasn't loud, but it ended months of pressure in a single second. Vanessa didn't argue, she couldn't, because arguments don't work very well against certified records. Outside the courthouse, reporters immediately surrounded the developers. Nobody came to interview me, I preferred it that way. I walked across the parking lot toward my truck when Deputy Lisa Grant caught up with me. You knew this was coming. I suspected. She smiled. You know what impresses me? What's that? You never tried to beat them with emotion. I shrugged. Paper lasts longer than anger, she laughed. I'm going to remember that. 3 months later, the county completed its investigation. Silver Ridge was required to resubmit every engineering drawing, every boundary survey, every access proposal. Construction remained suspended until every discrepancy had been corrected. The company eventually built its neighborhood, just not through my pasture. They built a proper entrance exactly where it should have been from the beginning. A few weeks after everything ended, I replaced the damaged fence posts one last time. The calves wandered back to the southern field like nothing had ever happened. Life has a funny way of returning to normal after people stop trying to force it to be something else. Sometimes I drive past that neighborhood on my way into town. Most of the people living there have no idea how close those houses came to being built on paperwork that should never have existed. And honestly, that's probably for the best, because this story was never really about winning. It was about refusing to surrender something simply because the other side had more money, louder voices, or a tighter deadline. My grandfather used to tell me that land remembers everyone who walks across it. After everything that happened, I think people do too. Now I'd like to hear from you. If you were sitting in that county board meeting, would you have voted to stop the project until every document was corrected? Or do you think economic progress should sometimes move faster than property disputes? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that doing the right thing is usually harder, but always worth it.